Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. The First Minister's meetings scheduled today and tomorrow in Ottawa have been cancelled. The Prime Minister was set to meet with Indigenous leaders today to discuss pressing issues like the COVID-19 pandemic. Jamie Pasha-Gumscombe reports.
The Prime Minister's meeting with premiers and Indigenous leaders was cancelled after Justin Trudeau's wife Sophie became ill following a trip to London. The two are in self-quarantine, awaiting medical test results, and have cancelled in-person meetings. COVID-19 remains a concern for Indigenous communities. Today, Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller says Indigenous communities are more vulnerable in part due to overcrowded housing.
There is an increased risk in communities. Everyone knows the historic numbers with respect to H1N1, and as COVID-19 gets further profiled, we can get a better snapshot and picture and an ability to react. Right now, the focus is ensuring that internally and with provincial and territorial partners, we have the resources ready to ramp up if and when in the event there is an infection in the community, and specifically because of the vulnerability of Indigenous communities.
During today's Standing Committee meeting on Indigenous and Northern Affairs, Miller suggested tents for people to self-quarantine are one option to limit the spread of the virus. In question period, NDP MP Charlie Angus was critical of the idea.
If COVID-19 hits a community like Bearskin Lake or Kashechewan, we're in the nightmare scenario, because how do you self-isolate in a home of 21 people full of mold? And so the minister's plan is to bring in tents. What, in James Bay in March? That ain't going to cut it. When are we going to see a sense of urgency to protect the lives of First Nation people?
Valerie Gideon, a senior assistant deputy minister with Indigenous Services Canada, said in addition to isolation tents, they are sending hand sanitizer, bottled water, and face masks to communities.
So we're also looking at temporary shelter solutions, right, that would offer more robust environments for people to stay. So, for instance, if you're having additional service providers that are going to fly into communities, right, they're not necessarily a place to stay. The nursing station residences will be full. People's homes may not be an option. They may not want external people to stay in their homes. The hotels may be full. And so in those circumstances, we're looking at temporary shelter solutions that would have a heating component as well as a plumbing source.
Trudeau's meeting with national Indigenous leaders has been postponed indefinitely, but the feds say prevention and response plans in place for the COVID-19 pandemic will remain a priority. Jamie Pasha-Gumscombe, APTN National News, Ottawa.
APTN actually just learned that that National Indigenous Leaders meeting with Trudeau will happen tomorrow via teleconference. We'll keep you posted on what comes of that. As COVID-19 continues to spread across the globe, APTN's Tina House visited a homeless encampment in Vancouver to find out what's being done to prevent the virus from spreading to those less fortunate.
With health officials saying that washing your hands with clean water and soap is the best way to prevent the spread of COVID-19, thousands of homeless people across the country do not have that luxury. And one look around this tent city in Oppenheimer Park, many people would say that this is an example of extreme poverty. However, according to Chrissy Brett, despite their situation, she says, believe it or not, they are actually considered the lucky ones, because they have access to a sink with running water and soap to wash their hands.
Here we do have access to a bathroom. We continue to work with the city to try and figure out ways that we can continue to ensure that these bathrooms are open. The men's is currently closed for repair, which will take a few days.
Jeff Redding is the chair of the First Nations Health Authority. He says that the COVID-19 pandemic is rapidly changing, and he's also concerned about the homeless population.
They need to be particularly careful. You know, it's up to urban entities, you know, to be able to go forward and educate and provide services to people who are in these vulnerable circumstances.
We asked the City of Vancouver about what's being done to help the homeless, and they sent this statement. Right now, Vancouver Coastal Health has said that the risk remains low, and the City of Vancouver will adjust our response based upon the organization's recommendations. But those sentiments are not being shared by Olga Simpson. Since she heard about the coronavirus, she's been deeply concerned.
Do you think enough is being done right now to prevent the spread here in downtown Hillside?
No, we're not even told nothing. We should have like little writings about it, you know, how to prevent Because none of these people have no TVs, like you said. They don't know what's going on.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
The 2020 Juno Awards are the latest event to be cancelled over COVID-19 concerns. The announcement came early this morning ahead of Sunday's big show. Many artists are already in Saskatoon. One of them is Attawapiscat's Adrian Sutherland, who is a member of the band Midnight Shine. Sutherland was supposed to play a Juno event tonight. He's with our Dennis Ward right now in Saskatoon. Dennis?
Thanks, Melissa. Adrian, I guess maybe your initial thoughts when you heard this morning that the Junos and the events leading up to it are now off.
Well, disappointment. I know I was wondering about that leaving home because I know I had heard there were some other large public gatherings that have been canceled as a result of the threat for this virus that's been going around. Overall it's just disappointing, but I think we need to respect the advice we're getting from public health officials and follow the advice to try and slow this down and limit the spread of this COVID-19 virus.
Before the announcement was made, we were seeing some artists pull out. Was that something that you'd considered yourself over concern?
Yeah, I actually thought about it. Not traveling at all during the outbreak. I'd actually much preferred to stay home. We had last 2 months were just booked solid with a lot of different things going on and juggling different projects. So I much rather stay home and not travel if I don't need to, and hopefully we don't contract anything up there.
Just briefly, we mentioned that there were other events you were expected to perform tonight, and something that's close to your heart, the Juno Cup. Your thoughts on, I guess, not being able to participate in that again this year?
Well, like I said, disappointing. I know I ran into one other artist who is supposed to be in the game as well. Very disappointing. He brought his whole family down to participate in the events. So it's very unfortunate that we're not able to do that because it's a lot of it's a lot of fun, and it also is for a good cause, raising money for instruments and gear to bring in schools. So again, I mean, we're following best advice we're being given. So I think the right choice has been made.
Well, Adrian, we'll leave it there. Safe travels home. Thanks for doing this for us. We'll send it back to Melissa in Winnipeg.
Thanks, Dennis. We're learning a lot more about the coronavirus as it spreads across the globe, and increasingly it's on the minds of people here. Now classified as a pandemic by the World Health Organization, many are wondering what this means for Indigenous communities. Dr. Barry LaValle is an Indigenous physician, family physician here in Manitoba, specializing in Indigenous health and Northern practice. He joins us now. Thank you for joining us, Dr. LaValle. So the federal government said that COVID-19 could infect between 30 and 70% of Canadians. Will Indigenous people be at a lower risk because of the remoteness of our communities, or at a higher risk because of crowded housing, poor plumbing, underlying health issues?
We really can't say at this moment, and even the models that look at how fast the virus will travel and how many people will be exposed, I believe, vary. Some of the concerns that we do have for First Nations communities, Métis communities, and perhaps some Inuit communities is really looking at the living conditions. So whether people have access to good food, quantity, quality, whether there's not a lot of overcrowding or overcrowding in their homes. And really you have to think as well, for First Nations and Métis particularly, there's a lot of diabetes. There's different chronic diseases. And so those things can actually, when you think about it, make a person perhaps more vulnerable, or perhaps they can get sicker if the virus comes. So that certainly is on the minds of a lot of people at this point, including First Nations and Métis leadership.
Yeah. What advice can you share with our viewers about how to protect yourself? And for, if we talk about going to self-isolation, if you think that you may have been exposed, you're not feeling well, and you don't know what it is. How do you even go into self-isolation if you're living in a home with, say, 10 people?
Sure, that's a great question. I think people in the communities have to think about this not as an individual going into isolation, but really take it to the family. So if you have a couple of people who are sick, a child and perhaps a mom or dad or whoever's at home, the family itself probably has to go into isolation. So unlike what some of the messaging is about a personal self-isolation, sometimes it's not practical. But there are many things that individuals and community people could do to slow the spread of the virus.
What are those?
And that's really the highlight of what we need to address. So things like washing your hands and practicing washing your hands as is directed by your local health authorities, and not taking it, you have to take it very seriously. If we can slow the virus coming into the communities, we actually can ensure that the local health providers can serve those who need to be seen. Also that our chief and councils and our Métis councils and our governing structures in the communities can attend to our needs. If there are needs where perhaps we need food, we need to get help taking care of our kids, any number of things of that nature. So washing hands for 20 seconds multiple times through the day, but in specific times like if you've taken care of a sick person, before you get food ready, when you go to the toilet, if you actually visited somebody who was sick, protecting yourself in that way, that's one of the main things. So that's actually a very powerful thing to start practicing immediately, actually. There are a number of other things you could do as well. So I want to remind people that getting your medications, if you have diabetes or if you have any other kind of illness, if you've had a stroke or heart disease, if you've had cancer, really practice taking care of yourself and making your immune system or your body able to handle the virus should it come your way. So get your medications, take care of yourself, and this really, for all of our community people, this is an opportunity to really consider to stop smoking. By making the lungs as healthy as possible, it can diminish or reduce the chances that we could get very ill with the virus. Now, on top of that, let's remember that some of the information we have from previous activities in other parts of the world, most people will not get sick. They'll certainly have some symptoms, a runny nose, a bit of a cough, perhaps a bit of a fever. They're going to do well, okay? You have to think about, in your communities, whether you're in Edmonton, Toronto, Winnipeg, or the far north, watch out for your grandma and grandpa. Watch out for your old uncle and auntie, or perhaps the people who live alone and don't have a lot of support. Someone in the community, in the family, has to take the obligation to go bang on the door and find out if your auntie or uncle is doing well. We know that with this virus, particularly those who are older and those who have those chronic diseases I mentioned, like diabetes, etc., they're the ones we worry about. Okay, so watch out for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This is very valuable advice. I know we all appreciate it, and thanks for calming us down a little bit.
Okay, you're welcome.
Always great to talk with him. Well, we'll of course be keeping a close watch on this pandemic as it unfolds in Canada. It's time for us to take a quick break, but first, here's tomorrow's weather forecast for the east and the central parts of the country.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. There's a growing rift between the provincial organizations that make up the Métis National Council. At issue is the suspension of Ontario from the MNC over its recognition of 6 historical communities. Manitoba Métis Federation President David Chartrand says they do not belong as Métis communities. But the presidents of Ontario, Alberta, and Saskatchewan want to meet and discuss the issue. However, there's been no Métis National Council meeting in 18 months. Those 3 presidents will all be on tonight's show, right after the national news.
Starting off in St. John's, it's -2 with sunshine, 4 and cloud in Halifax. Cartwright -5 and snow. Kuujjuaq -18, clear skies. Chibougamau 0 and snow. Val-d'Or 2 and cloud. Windsor 7 and rain. North Bay 5 and cloudy. So look at -7 and snow. -10 and snow for Big Trout Lake. -13 for God's Lake and Norway House and snow there. -17 and snow for Churchill. -10 for Winnipeg and Brandon. Sunny skies. 9s for Dauphin and Gimli. -9. -14 for Saskatoon and clear skies. -8 and sunshine for Regina. Stony Rapids -18 and snow. -13 and some sunshine for Meadow Lake. Welcome back. The Muskrat Falls Public Inquiry final report released earlier this week offered some really harsh conclusions about how the Newfoundland government and energy company conducted themselves in a controversial dam project there. Here to talk about the report's findings is Caitlin Urquhart. She is a St. John's-based lawyer who represented Labrador land protectors throughout the inquiry. So, Caitlin, thanks for taking time to join us to talk about this bombshell report. Tell us who you represented in the inquiry and why these groups wanted a voice in the process.
So I had the good fortune of representing the Grand River Keeper Labrador and the Labrador Land Protectors. So they're groups of individuals who are passionate about protecting the ecosystem of what was the Grand River, is now referred to as the Churchill River, which was is the project that was dammed in this project.
And what was it that they? Why did they want to be involved in the inquiry process?
So these individuals have been involved in environmentalism and trying to protect this river since the 1990s. And they were fully engaged throughout the environmental assessment process. That process was a joint federal-provincial process that had over 40 hearing days and was very robust. And in fact, that actually the report that came out of that indicated that the project should not proceed without further investigation of the economics as well as the potential health impacts of the project. However, the government decided to go ahead and bring forward the project in any event. So because they took every avenue, there were also numerous court applications that were brought to try and stop this project. Throughout the whole time, they've been taking every step possible, every avenue available to them. Ultimately, in 2016, many of them were involved in direct actions and demonstrations that led to people being arrested, and some of them continue to be dragged through the colonial justice system to this day. So they had a very direct connection to this project. These folks live in the area. They live in the vicinity where their country foods are going to be contaminated with methyl mercury. They're concerned about flooding in the event of a dam break. These are very real concerns of the folks who live in that area, and that's why they wanted to be at the table and hear what was coming out of the inquiry.
Justice Richard LeBlanc, who was the inquiry's commissioner, he concluded that Newfoundland and Labrador government and Nalcor Energy created a, quote, environment of mistrust and suspicion, end quote, that ultimately led to the protest in 2016. What's the significance of that finding?
I think that, as I said, they went to court on multiple occasions to try and have this project looked at again, to have there's issues addressed. I think it's validating for folks because that's what they experienced, right? They took every possible step to try to ensure that their concerns were heard and addressed prior to this project going ahead. And the fact that the commissioner found that was what in fact happened, was the government and Nalcor failed to act fairly with the Indigenous groups as well as environmental issues, and that they created this environment of mistrust and suspicion, which is exactly, as I say, what the individuals who I represented and their groups, that was their experience, so it was validating.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's another much bigger hydro dam proposed for the Churchill River in Labrador at Gull Island. What does this report mean for the fate of that dam, do you think?
I think most people are hopeful that will mean that project will not go ahead. certainly, so that was part of the same environmental assessment. The two projects were assessed together. And really, I mean, this is on Indigenous land, and I think it's sort of, we're seeing across the country that these projects need to have true, robust consultation, meaningful consultation, consent from Indigenous communities. It has to be more than just checking boxes. And that was one of the things that the commissioner looked at, and one of the things that he was, he found that this was not, did not meet that standard. Now, he didn't say it not from the legal standard, because that was outside of his terms of reference, so outside of the scope of what he was allowed to say. But I think there's certainly, reading between the lines there, it was a pretty strong indictment of the way in which Indigenous folks and environmental issues were addressed.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, and congratulations. This was definitely looked like a win from the perspective of you representing your clients.
Yeah, I think people will be pleased with that result, but unfortunately still have to live with the consequences of this project.
Certainly a relevant topic given the ongoing pipeline issue in the Wet'suwet'en territory on the other coast. We need to take another break, but coming up, Beothuk remains return to Canada, and here's the rest of tomorrow's weather for the west and the north. Off to northern Alberta, we've got -19 in sunshine for Fort McMurray, -17 in sunny for Grand Prairie. -3 in snow for Red Deer, +3 and cloud for Medicine Hat. Tofino, 9 degrees and rain, 0 for Bella Coola and sunny. -9 in sunshine for Fort Nelson, -12 in sunshine for Prince George. Dawson City, -13 in sunny skies, -11 for Whitehorse and Watson Lake. Fort Laird and Trout Lake, sunshine and -10 degrees, -12 and snow for Norman Wells. Paulatuck, -14 and snow. Fort McPherson, -3 and snow. Chesterfield, -29 and clear skies, -28 for Baker Lake. Tallyoak, -32 and clear. Clyde River, -23, mostly sunny. And Iqaluit, -26 and mostly sunny. Welcome back. Following years of negotiations between the federal and provincial governments, Scotland, and Indigenous leaders, the remains of two of the last known Beothuk have been returned to the island of Newfoundland. On Wednesday, the province of Newfoundland and Labrador announced that the partial remains of Damatsuit and Nunasabasut have arrived back in Newfoundland after being held at a museum in Scotland for nearly 2 centuries. Indigenous leaders in the province are praising this repatriation, but they also say they would like to see the remains buried at their original resting place near the Red Indian Lake in the island's interior. That's, of course, where those remains were stolen from. It's great to have them back in their homeland. That is all the news that we have for you for tonight. If you've missed anything, you can always find more on our website, aptnnews.ca. Stay tuned right now for Nation to Nation as Todd Lamoran sits down with the leaders of the Métis Nation from Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba to talk about the rift within the nation over citizenship and the homeland. You won't want to miss it. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night. See you back here tomorrow.